For those who are listening in on this conversation, I'm talking to Simon Haigh today. He's a growth strategist and CEO of GCM Consulting Limited and simonhaigh.com. Our conversation today is about, can leaders make their own luck? So a bit more about my friend Simon. Through his Ireland and UK-based and Australian-based company, GCM Advisory, and operating as simonhaigh.com, he helps organizations and leaders unlock, build, and sustain business, leadership, brand, and mindset growth through his coaching, consulting, training, publications, speaking, and learning programs, e-learning programs. Simon's clients include high-performing leaders, companies, business schools such as Trinity College Ireland, Smurfit, UCD in Ireland, Southampton in the UK, professional organizations and government bodies globally. His work is endorsed by the world's #1 leadership thinker, Marshall Goldsmith, nominated by Peopleham as one of the top 200 influential thought leaders in 2020. Thinkers 360, entrepreneurship, legal, health and wellness, mental health, management, all up there and featured in Peopleham top 100 thought leadership series of mindful negotiation. He's also featured on the BBC, Australia's ABC television, and numerous radio and podcast channels, including his own radio show on the UK's first wellbeing channel, Serenity Radio. Simon started out as a tri-qualified, meaning he trained in England, Wales, and Australia and Ireland, commercial lawyer, and he's also an entrepreneur and has built and sold out of technology, luxury items, and travel companies. He's been a C-suite executive, companies like Nana Development Corporation, Dell, BHP, and Xilinx, I think is correct. Simon, I'm not sure I got that one right. Xilinx, yeah, and sat on 5 boards across different industries, 4 continents over the 27 years. He's also the co-founder and partner of Inclusion in Leadership.com. Simon's work on 2 of his Amazon 5-star books, How to Be a Better Deal Closer and Deal Making for Corporate Growth, are endorsed by Marshall Goldsmith, and he's also an associate member of the Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder-Centered Coaching Organization. He's an acclaimed keynote speaker, and he's spoken in Australia, the US, UK, and Ireland, Canada, and China, including world forums. Ireland's Tech Connect 2019, Northern Ireland Small Business Conference in 2019, Brand Forum London 2019, Startup Scale-Up Summit UK 2020, Boga Investment Summit China 2021. Now, when you hear people talk to you like this now, Simon, what goes on for you?
What I'm hearing is I've done a lot of things. I've done a lot of things in 28 years, Keith, and I guess the last 8 of those 28, a lot of it hasn't been planned. It's been a journey of, I kind of look back on the last 8 years, you know, those pinball tables where you have a flipper at the bottom and you're hitting the ball. That's what it's been like. So my life has been the perimeter of the pinball table, but anything goes in the table, you know, and I guess that's why I'm interested in growth, because for me, growth is all about seizing the moment, having a sense of your own awareness and your own journey and your authentic self, and being aligned as possible to get a sense that what you're doing is the right thing at that time. And of course you make mistakes. I've made mistakes, but then it's about observing yourself and seeing where next. So yeah, there's a lot going on there.
It is, and it's very interesting to read. You know, I'm not great at reading off prompts, but I will say that when I read it, there's just a lot going on in terms of, you know, where you've been, what you've done, and what matters to you, which I think is, it's really interesting, you know, because I understand that, you know, from my own personal experience is something you don't buy on a shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got access to massive resources there.
No, I agree. Somebody described me, I think you referred to me, Dr. Alenka, I can't remember her second name, she's from Croatia. And we had a chat a month or so ago, and she described me as a truth seeker. I'd never heard that before, and I don't have any ego about it, but I reflected, and I guess what drives me all the time, Keith, and that's part of this conversation. I haven't rehearsed for this conversation, so I don't know where we're going to go, but I'm always interested in seeing what next. And somebody else I spoke to recently said that what matters in life is in the space in between. You know, I love that. You know, who knows? The magic comes out of the stuff we don't always plan for, we don't always rehearse for. So that's how I've kind of treated my life. Now, I've got a sense of the direction, and I don't do overly stupid things anymore because I'm pushing on, 54. So I don't take over risk. I used to take more risk as an entrepreneur, but I just like to see where it goes. That's it. I like to see where it goes.
Well, I mean, the only way I can relate to this in this conversation is, I've always found that guys who are constantly curious about the subject of leadership and constantly looking to update themselves through, the thought leadership that's out there. And I mean, Marshall Goldsmith would be one of the top guys. And obviously, you've been endorsed by him, which for me is significant. So the value that we add to this world in terms of leadership and sustainable leadership, of course, is a huge attraction for me to in terms of what your work is, because my work is in a similar place.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's this question now. You talk about strategic serendipity. What does this mean? I mean, I'm very curious about this now.
So I don't honestly know whether I came up with that term. I don't know whether it was used before me, but it was something that I just thought about a year and a half ago. So I can't claim it as mine, but it might be mine. And it's my way of saying there is a way, we talk about you can make your own luck in life. And it's very easy to put that down, but I think there's something very strong in that. And so that's what I'm talking about, is if as a leader, on the one hand, you need to give yourself freedom and space to be innovative and to think outside the box. But if you do certain things right, if you have passion, if you have drive, if you have hope, if you have determination, if you have a purpose, those 5 things, then the chances are, and you keep doing it and you keep doing it, the chances are you can make more luck for yourself than if you just don't operate through that prism. So it's really about making luck for yourself as a leader. Now, of course, things go wrong. We can't plan for pandemics and macroeconomic issues. But I think if you do certain things, which we can talk about, and do them consistently, but also be flexible, have what I call a growth flex mindset, then I do think it's possible to look back and say, wow, I actually manifested that pathway. If that makes sense. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and one of the things, I mean, as you're talking to me, it's like, we've all traveled some kind of a journey, and I think one of the things that you said early on is we don't really fully understand the richness of the resource of not just success, but failure and having made mistakes.
Yeah.
Again, not that kind of stuff is just not bought on the shelf. The experienced practitioner and the one who knows leadership and is constantly reaching for the next level in terms of enabling himself and other people to grow their enterprises. I don't think that can ever be undervalued. It is a very, very rich resource, and something you obviously subscribe to in your work. And you mentioned awareness.
Yeah.
And I'll put it to you like this. How does this underpin the leadership success?
So for me, awareness is critically important. I mean, I mentioned, I talk about 3 letter A's. I talk about being your authentic self. There's nothing more powerful than that in terms of being a true leader and attracting followers. And you need to be aligned. You need to be doing what you love and want to do and feel compelled to do and have a purpose. But I strongly believe, in a lot of conversations I've been having with thought leaders, that unless you have a strong sense of awareness, what motivates you, your thoughts, desires, triggers, behaviors, the good and the bad, You know, the Star Wars stuff, you know, there's a light force and there's a dark force in all of us, Keith. And unless you have a really good, strong sense of you, the good and the bad in you, how can you truly be an authentic, powerful leader? And I'll give you an example of this. I was on the best ever residential leadership course I was on. It was a week's course, 20 years ago here in Ireland. It was run by an emotional intelligence expert, a Polish guy called Mike Fisher, and Richard Olivier, so Laurence Olivier's son. So you had an actor and an emotional intelligence expert. And we were residential course. I was the most junior executive. And the premise of this week was Shakespeare's Henry V. And for those of you, you know, I'm not a great literature person, but this is a play about a young king who the night before the Battle of Agincourt has good and bad thoughts. That the good thoughts are, or the positive thoughts are, I'm a king and I can slay the French and I'll win, and it's macho and it's ego. And the negative thoughts are, I'm terrified, I'm a little boy, I'm crying, I'm fearful.
Yeah.
And the premise of that week was to be a true leader. And even when I say it, I always have a shiver down my spine, because I remember the power of that week. To be a true leader, you need to know, your strengths, but also you need to be aware of those weaknesses. And don't cover them up. Be very aware of them, and then find ways of allowing others to fill in the gaps or for you to improve. So that's what I'm talking about. Awareness is so important.
Yeah, well, I look, I have to agree with you there, because, you know, I think the old traditional world of leadership is, you know, we're harder, faster than, and smarter than. And I'm not sure that that's something that we can sustain anymore. I think in the modern world and the postmodern world, as we're moving into it at a rate of knots.
Yeah.
The leaders need to, I believe that leaders need to, you know, be equally vulnerable in order to lead, instead of just, you know, they're going to have to understand that they're going to have to learn from the same people they lead, and that will create a better fellowship, is what I'm suggesting.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned vulnerability. That's a good point. A lot of people think that being authentic, being aligned on authentic, is surrender, is giving up. But I think it's real strength to get a sense of who you are. Yeah. And regardless of those weaknesses and faults that we all have in us, you still manifest that true version of you, because we're all attracted to that. When we watch movies in the television, we're all attracted to people who cry, to vulnerability. We're attracted to that in others. And yet we get this false sense that we can't show it ourselves. And and that manifests in the workplace. I mean, or in politics, we've seen it with the pandemic. Those leaders, and I'll mention, you know, Boris Johnson and Trump, who for months were saying the pandemic will be over by Easter and Christmas. We all knew they didn't know that, right? And so when a leader pretends, what do stakeholders do? We fill the gaps with anxiety. We don't believe them, so we become anxious. And so leaders are missing an opportunity just by not being vulnerable and honest.
Absolutely, I couldn't. I mean, but it is a bit of a strange world, because I think we're kind of conditioned to believe that the harder, faster than, knows better than type of leader is the one that is actually going to, you know, make the difference in the longer term. And then what they do is they make mistakes. And then they make mistakes, and it costs not just them, but thousands of people, either jobs or opportunities. Whereas they could have actually just listened, to what was actually happening around them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you, in one of your sort of questions, there was this thing about resilience and grit as well, which is I'm super curious about.
So for resilience is something. Resilience and grit and motivation and strength are some things that I've really had to dig into myself as a result of my own journey in life and as a result of the work I do. And for me, resilience, so there's a subtle difference. They're all really important. For me, resilience is the capacity to cope with life, and it's how you manage your emotional, behavioral responses to life. For me, indicates those levels of resilience. And there are broadly three types. There's self-resilience, how we successfully manage our own life, so dealing with ambiguity or dealing with anxiety. There's societal resilience, how we interact, so how we network, how we communicate, how we manage uncertainty, those things. Then there's what I call life resilience, how we just manage the vagaries and the ambiguities and the uncertainties of life. And for me, resilience is a bit of a learnt skill. Humans, apart from, I think, the fear of heights, babies are not scared of anything, right? So we're born resilient, as it were, and we kind of learn to become conservative and fearful. We pick up anxieties and fears from our parents and from our siblings from early years. And I think once you get an awareness of what needs to be, some of those negative traits that need to be replaced, I think you have to really deconstruct some unhelpful behaviors. I've gone through this, you know, and then and through stillness and through focus. So that's what resilience is about. It's the capacity to cope. You need to be aware of your levels, and then if you sense, or if the feedback is you don't have it, you need to work on it. Grit, I think, is something that I kind of alluded to before. It is a form of resilience, but I think it's a more useful term in leadership. And so for me, grit includes resilience, but I think to be gritty, I think a leader also has to be hopeful, not deluded, but hopeful. And I think there's a balance there. A lot of leaders can move into delusion. I think a leader has to be gritty. I think a leader has to have a strong sense of purpose. Because if you as a leader don't have a strong sense of purpose, I don't think you're really going to have the followers you want or deserve. Because people sense if you're being fake, you know. So I think there's being resilient is an ingredient. I think there's being hopeful. I think there's having a sense of purpose. And the fourth thing then is you've just got to work at this stuff. I mean, you know, people like, you know, these major basketball players. I can't remember the guy who recently passed away, a star basketball player. And somebody asked him, why do you practice 5 hours a day? You're the world's best basketball player. And he said, that is the reason I'm the world's best basketball player. So just because you get a sense, just because you have a sense of purpose, of hope, you get a sense of your resilience, that's not enough. You still have to work hard. That's what grit is.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at your leadership journey and your leadership story, grit, resilience, or bits of both?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, my personal story, which I've kind of touched upon in the last couple of years, you know, I've had some health issues. I've had some, you know, some real challenges over the years, and which at times really derailed me, but I've learned a huge amount. I've also had a failed business in Australia, Keith. I think we've spoken about that, and I lost a fair amount of money on that. And I could have gone down the avenue of getting really kind of aggressive and nasty and resentful, but I chose not to be. You know, resentment is a terrible waste of time when you think about, and I think this is something that really distracts leaders from that constructive journey. If you're resentful about somebody who's harmed you, the chances are they're not going to know your resentment. Only you know your level of resentment. And that dislocates you from doing more constructive things. So I've seen that from above, and I've had to work through that stuff. And as you said before, you can read this in textbooks, but there is actually no substitute from viscerally going through this stuff. You need to live and breathe it and smell it, and then get a sense of your own limits to truly, I think, talk about it.
Well, you know what? I think we spoke about one of my profs. He was my program supervisor, a guy called Professor Bob Keegan, or Robert Keegan from Harvard. At the time, he was Harvard's head of adult professional development, and he had this wonderful thing. And I think I've got this one by rote. It's like, first observations are key to the next. It's like, you know, in changing your consciousness around just about anything. So what we do is we tend to actually ignore the true feelings that are, you know, like resentment, right? And what's actually going on for us. And if we're unable to observe that in ourselves, and then, you know, understand what we need to do to make a change, right, and learn from it, it's unlikely that we can help others. But a rich resource, a good that you know that you were, and therefore you can actually help another guy understand that he is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But having said all that, there is a fine line as well. And I know you'll know what I'm talking about here, is that just because you've been on that journey of awakening and you're aware of your levels of resilience, and you have a good level of awareness, don't allow ego to take over. Don't allow ego to whisper in the back of your head and say, Simon, you're great, you're a guru. Nobody's a guru, right? I mean, maybe the higher power is a guru, but just remain keep that authentic, vulnerable humility, because that's what attracts people to leaders as well, right? You do need to have strength of character. You do need to practice what a great CEO that I used to work under, an amazing guy called Wim Rolance. He used to talk about democratic decision making, dictatorial execution. So he'd garner everybody's feedback, but at the end of the day, his neck would be on the block for making the decision. So you'd just, vulnerable, humility-based leadership is not weakness. It's having a sense of calmness, compassion, and courage. And you can only do that if you have a real sense of awareness,
Well, we've got an interesting thing happening to us now. And I don't know how it's affected you, but it definitely has affected me. And the whole idea of, we've had this pandemic, and it's I don't know, but I know that's like most other practitioners, the uncertainty that came with that and the fallout that came with that was something like, I think there was a bank crash somewhere in 2008 or something in Ireland when I lived there. But this one has just been a sustained, at us all the time.
Yeah.
Now you look at the pandemic, right? So this would be an interesting conversation on its own. What do you think we need to be looking at in terms of leaders, right?
So I always start with a quote from Marshall Goldsmith, and if I can remember rightly, he says, to be successful in tomorrow's world, and I think we're in tomorrow's world today.
Oh yeah.
We kind of went to bed in 2019 and we've woken up in 2030. We think we're in 2021, but we've accelerated rapidly. So he says, to be successful in tomorrow's world, leaders have to embrace global thinking, cross-cultural diversity, understand rapidly changing technology, as you and I are doing here. But the key for me is when he says, and rely more on collaborations and be facilitators rather than experts. In other words, listen. The world is a lot flatter. Just you and I wouldn't have met. You and I wouldn't be talking if it weren't for technology, Keith, right? And so there's so much access to thought leadership and to others. And I think the textbooks in 20 years' time will suggest strongly that leadership will have become a lot more democratic, a lot more horizontal, a lot more open-minded. About different models, if that makes sense. And so I think that's a real starting point. I think leadership isn't going to be as entrenched. I think leadership will be more of a rainbow of thinking and emotions and levels of awareness, if that makes sense.
It makes huge sense to me. So I know that I live with this like strange maxim. When it becomes complicated, let's see if we can find a way to sort of radically simplify it yet again.
Yeah.
The thing that I've always believed that in a time like this, when we're in these, there's definitely going to have to be a lot of learning from employer, employee. There's going to be a lot of embracing of stuff that was never really considered, as part of the leadership journey. And there's going to be a lot more sort of active participation, a lot more should be allowed. The work from home thing seems to be moving into fast pace.
Yeah.
The digital sort of technology that's happening, the onboarding of people and business, through tech. It seems like a very different world. And I agree with you. What was nicely plodding along, until this coronavirus thing arrived, has changed the face of the way we work.
Yeah.
So a guy like you now, right, who's out there rooting for us, right, and we want to learn from you, and you believe that this is a thing that can be taught, yeah?
So I honestly think that the levels of awareness of this more collaborative, facilitative leadership can definitely be taught, right? But there's no substitute for actually doing it as well. You have to be a leader. You have to go through a process, right? But I think there's some common themes I'd just like to touch on, Keith. And I think the first thing is that coming out of this pandemic, I think it's quite clear, if you look at some of the political leaders and successful business leaders over the last 2 years, they've been more transparent and more honorable than some of the old guard. So so I think it's really important for that to be taught, right? And it might sound, why would you need to teach that stuff? I think that's critically important, about having a single tone of delivering, not not changing your tone depending on the good news and the bad news.
Yeah.
And trust, I think, is something that almost needs to be retaught as well. I mean, we all know what lack of trust feels like, right? But it's very hard to define. If I asked anybody to define what trust is, it's very hard to write it down. But as human beings, we know it in our guts. And I think coming out of this pandemic, we're a lot more sensitive, a lot more aware of our humanity.
Yes.
I think we've realized that we probably shouldn't rely on political leaders as much as we did, because quite honestly, they was as clueless as you and I about what to do, right? Clearly, So I think we need to be, so transparency and being honorable is one. I think resilient leadership also needs to deliver through obscurity. And I think what I mean by that is, what I think definitely needs to be taught, and I know you'll like this, is that the idea that leaders have to be perfect is nonsense. Leaders need to operate through the prism of expediency, right? Do your best with what you have, be honest about what you're using and how you're saying it, and try and deliver that trust-based environment, right? And I guess the next thing I would say, so that's transparent honesty, resilient, delivering resilient leadership needs to deliver through obscurity. I think really important as well is leaders need to, as much as possible, maintain a steady purpose while allowing for a strategy to flex. I think we've realized that strategies can change like that. And I talk about a three-legged stool. Leaders have to manage costs and efficiencies, which is difficult, while at the same time, these are all incompatible, while at the same time projecting to the world that everything's okay, while at the same time managing a 3 to 5 year strategy. They're all incompatible. So somehow, through that trust-based, calm, compassionate, courageous, honest, as much as corporately possible leadership, that needs to be managed. And those things, I think, really need to be retaught. I think we really need to think about resilient, the importance of vulnerability and trust and honesty and willingness. And then finally, resilient leadership, I think, needs to provide a bridge to the future. And so I do think all these things can be retaught. I mean, if somebody asked me what the definition of trust is, I would struggle. So I'm open-minded to learn more about trust.
Okay, so look, when I look at guys like you, and I talk to guys like you, and I talk to many guys like you, but there's only one real Simon Haigh. Okay, and I find that talking to you is very easy, right? So for me, talking to you is easy. Therefore, it should be easy for people to access you, right? And they can get into the space with you. So it's probably important for us and the people who are listening to this conversation to understand how they can get hold of you, and where you find your work most valuable and most useful, and what is it that you're offering us in this world.
Yeah, well, the easiest way to find me, LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can find me Simon Haigh, Haigh on LinkedIn. I'm referred to as the growth strategist. Also through my website, simonhaigh.com, or Simon at, it's all Simon Haigh, or simon@simonhaigh.com is the email. In terms of the work I do, that's a great question. I mean, everything sits under the umbrella of growth. And what I always say, I divide that into 4 aspects, and I work with businesses, leaders, entrepreneurs, business schools, anybody who looks at growth as an important thing. And what I mean by growth is the 4 attributes. So mindset growth. So I might work with a leader or entrepreneur to help them with their mindset, the levels of awareness, resilience, motivation. Then the second area of growth is leadership. And I have a lot of training programs and coaching programs and online stuff. So the second area is leadership growth. So having got a sense of who you are, how can you maximize your assertiveness, your influencing skills, your leadership of communication? Then that moves into business growth. So having got a sense of who you are, your leadership capabilities, do you have the right intuition for business? Do you have the right balance between risk and luck? Do you have a sense of situational awareness as much as your own self-awareness? And then finally, brand growth. Having put all that together and how to look at your frequency of your mindset, your leadership, your business capabilities. Can I then help clients with the right brand that fits all of that? So it's very ambitious, Keith. And maybe it's ambitious for, if a client just wants a business plan, maybe I'm not the right person, right? If they're not prepared to also look at the mindset of the people in the business or leadership. So I'm looking at the whole 4 pieces of jigsaw together.
Well, I find that interesting because I recently, as you know, I run workshops on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis around the world. And I came up with this thing. And I think I got it wrong, but it wasn't actually said like this. So when I listen to a guy like you, what happens for me is I think, is this man going to be good company for the journey? Right? And that's for me, that's it. Right? Yeah. Will I get the best from him? Will he get the best from me?
Exactly.
Without a doubt, I must say, obviously. I mean, just listening to you and talking to you and having
likewise.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I look at you and I think to myself, all right, there are people out there who need good company for the journey, right? Into the pandemic and post-pandemic, and that I would recommend that they really do get hold of you, because I would certainly vouch for it. I've just got to know you. I think you're a complete and total sort of postmodern thinker. I think you're bringing new stuff into the world that deserves to be here. I find you to be very accessible and very, very transparent and quite honest, which I think is a great quality.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that you've flagged the transparency and the honesty. And I guess that comes from my own personal journey of awakening and, having reached some dark places and realized that we're only, I'm 54, Keith. I probably got, if I'm lucky, 30, hopefully a bit more than that years, maybe a lot less, right? So I look at each day as a gift and what I can do to help others. Of course, I need to earn a living, and help others do what I went through, which was match their confidence with their capability. I'm nobody special. None of us are special, right? But I've learned a lot of things, and I've fitted what I've learned into the jigsaw of experience, if that makes sense. So I've got a sense of what works and what doesn't, and that's what I'm about. And the honesty, I guess, comes from Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall has been a guardian angel for me. He wrote the foreword to 2 of my books. I'd only met him once over dinner here in Ireland. He launched my last book, and I often think, why does he do that? Well, he does it for a lot of people, and his condition for helping people is that one day, Simon, will you help somebody else? And so that resonates in my ears. I must never lose the run of myself. I must never be unapproachable. I must never be aloof or ego-driven. You need to have your own boundaries, because there are people who take advantage, but you have that sense anyway. If you don't have that sense as a leader, you probably shouldn't be a leader. Remember, awareness.
Well, I can tell you something. I think we need people like you out there now. And I think the world is not the same world that we had before.
No.
If there's somebody who has that awareness out there and can help, well, I'm letting them know that I would be getting hold of the slightly younger Simon Haigh. And like you, I would also have ambitions to work until someone switches the lights off.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure when. So I think the whole purpose-driven fulfillment of a preferred life and making that contribution to this world is a great testimony to you. So I want to thank you for spending time with me. And I hope that you've enjoyed spending time with me as well.